In Formula One, we've seen teams rise and fall, dynasties come and go, and dominant forces collapse into irrelevance. But no story in the sport's long history is as extraordinary, as improbable or as iconic as the tale of Brawn GP in 2009. A team that came into existence almost by accident, built from the ashes of a manufacturer withdrawal, and somehow went on to conquer the sport with one of the most ingenious technical solutions of the modern era. This is the story of Brawn GP's championship-winning season. How the team was conceived, how they signed their drivers, how they stunned the world in preseason, and how a piece of clever engineering, the infamous double diffuser, changed Formula One forever. The fall of Honda and the birth of Brawn GP. To understand Brawn GP, we first have to go back to late 2008. Honda had been in Formula One as a works team since 2006, but despite pouring in vast resources, their results were dismal. In 2008, with Jenson and Rubens Barrichello driving, Honda managed just 14 points all year and finished 9th in the Constructors Championship. They were sinking hundreds of millions into F1 for almost no return. Then came the global financial crisis of 2008. Carmakers across the world were cutting costs, and Honda's board of directors decided that Formula One was an expense they simply couldn't justify. In December, just weeks after the season ended, they shocked the sport by announcing their immediate withdrawal. This left hundreds of staff at their Brackley factory in limbo, not to mention 2 drivers and a half-developed 2009 car. It looked like Honda's departure would end the project outright. But Ross Brawn, the team's technical director, a man who had been central to Michael Schumacher's dominance at both Benetton and Ferrari, refused to let it die. Brawn, along with Nick Fry, led a management buyout of the team for a symbolic fee of just £1. The staff, the facilities, and the almost complete car were kept alive, but Honda would no longer fund the operation. That left them with a major problem. The 2009 car had been designed around a Honda engine that was no longer available. The Mercedes engine deal. Ross Brawn moved quickly to secure an engine supplier. Toyota and Ferrari were both considered, but eventually Mercedes stepped in, supplying their V8S to the new team. This deal was crucial. Not only were Mercedes engines the most powerful and reliable on the grid at the time, but the integration of that power unit into a chassis originally designed for a very different engine was a miracle of engineering in itself. The fact that the car could even run with a Mercedes engine was impressive enough. Nobody knew yet that it would become a world beater. Driver lineup: Button and Barrichello. With Honda withdrawing, both Jenson and Rubens Barrichello were suddenly unemployed. Button, by this point, was seen by many as a wasted talent. He had shown flashes of brilliance early in his career, but after years in uncompetitive machinery, he was becoming an afterthought in F1. Barrichello, meanwhile, was the sport's most experienced driver, but was considered past his prime. There was even speculation that Bruno Senna-Ayrton's nephew might replace Barrichello to give the team a marketing boost. But in the end, Ross Brawn stuck with experience. Button and Barrichello were retained, and that stability proved invaluable once the season began. Preseason expectations, from survival to shockwaves. When Brawn GP was officially announced in March 2009, expectations were low. Most assumed they'd be fighting at the back of the grid, simply trying to survive. After all, they had almost no budget, limited testing time with their new engine, and drivers who had been written off. But then came preseason testing in Barcelona and Jerez. The white-liveried BGP-001 rolled out onto the track for the first time, and immediately stunned the paddock. Button topped the timing sheets. Barrichello was right behind him. People assumed they were running light fuel or trick setups, but as the days went on, it became clear. The Brawn GP car wasn't just fast, it was dominant. Some rival engineers even suspected sandbagging in reverse, that Brawn were hiding just how much performance they really had. It was one of the most shocking preseason test performances in F1 history. Suddenly, what had looked like a team destined for collapse became the talk of the paddock. The double diffuser, a rulebook masterstroke. At the heart of Brawn's pace was one of the most ingenious pieces of engineering of the modern era, the double diffuser. In 2009, Formula One underwent a huge regulation overhaul designed to reduce downforce and improve overtaking. Diffusers, the airflow structures at the rear of the car, were heavily restricted, but Brawn's technical team, led by Ross Brawn and engineers like Jörg Zander, discovered a loophole. By creating additional openings in the floor of the car, they were able to feed extra airflow into the diffuser, effectively giving it a double structure. This massively increased downforce, especially at low speeds, without technically breaking the regulations. Toyota and Williams also came up with similar concepts, but Brawn's execution was the most effective. When the car first appeared, rival teams protested immediately. They claimed the double diffuser was illegal, but at the season's opening round in Melbourne, the FIA stewards ruled it legal, and with that decision, the 2009 championship was effectively decided. Australia 2009, a dream debut. The Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne marked Brawn GP's debut. Nobody knew for sure how testing pace would translate into a race weekend, but qualifying ended all doubt. Button took pole position. Barrichello lined up second. It was a front-row lockout for a team that technically didn't even exist 4 months earlier. On race day, Button controlled the Grand Prix from start to finish, while Barrichello survived chaos on the opening lap to secure second. Brawn GP finished their first-ever race with a 1-2 finish. It was the most remarkable debut in Formula One history. The momentum didn't stop there. Button won 6 of the first 7 races, establishing a commanding lead in the championship. The BGP 001's downforce advantage was particularly potent on twisty, low-speed circuits like Monaco and Spain. The car's efficiency allowed Button to qualify on pole, manage his tyres, and dictate race pace with ease. Barrichello, though less consistent, also scored multiple podiums and later wins, providing crucial points for the Constructors' Championship. At this point, the paddock was in disbelief. Ferrari and McLaren, who had contested the epic 2008 championship battle, were nowhere. Red Bull, still an emerging force under Adrian Newey, were the closest challengers, but Brawn's head start was almost unassailable. The mid-season fight back. As the season progressed, rival teams began to close the gap. The double diffuser was copied by virtually everyone by mid-season, and Red Bull in particular developed their RB5 into a serious contender. Sebastian Vettel began winning races, and Brawn's performance edge started to fade as they struggled with tyre temperatures in cooler European conditions. This was where Button's early dominance became critical. Even though he wasn't winning anymore, the huge points lead he had built meant he could afford to finish on the podium or even lower down the order while still protecting his championship advantage. Barrichello, meanwhile, rediscovered some of his best form, winning in Valencia and Monza to keep himself in mathematical contention. But the momentum of the championship was firmly with Button. The championship sealed. By the time the season reached Brazil, Button needed just a solid result to clinch the title. In a thrilling drive from 14th on the grid, he stormed through the field to finish 5th enough to secure the 2009 World Championship. Jenson Button, once written off as a wasted talent, was now a world champion. Rubens Barrichello's performances had also been strong enough to secure second place in the Constructors' Championship for Brawn GP. It was an extraordinary achievement. A team that didn't even exist at the start of the year had built a car, found an engine, kept its drivers, and won both the Drivers and Constructors' Championships at the first attempt. The aftermath, from Brawn to Mercedes. The fairy tale didn't last long. Running a Formula One team is incredibly expensive, and despite their success, Brawn GP lacked the funding to sustain themselves long-term. By the end of 2009, Mercedes, impressed by the performance of both the team and their engines, purchased Brawn GP outright. Ross Brawn stayed on as team principal, and the outfit became the Mercedes Works team from 2010 onwards. Of course, we know what happened next. The foundations laid in that Brackley factory would evolve into the most dominant dynasty in F1 history, winning 8 consecutive Constructors' Championships between 2014 and 2021. But the 2009 season will always stand alone as something unique. A team born out of crisis, kept alive by sheer determination and propelled to glory by a combination of clever engineering, strong leadership, and drivers who refused to give up. Legacy of Brawn GP. The Brawn GP story remains one of Formula One's greatest legends. It's a reminder that in this sport, ingenuity and determination can overcome money and prestige. It's also a case study in how small loopholes in regulations can redefine competitive balance. Most importantly, it's a story of survival. When Honda pulled the plug, hundreds of staff faced unemployment and years of work risked being wasted. Instead, those same staff ended the year as world champions. And for Jenson Button, it was the crowning moment of a career that might otherwise have faded into obscurity. Brawn GP will always be remembered as the ultimate one-season wonder. But their impact on Formula One goes far beyond a single year. Without Brawn GP, there would be no modern Mercedes dynasty. And without the double diffuser, the history of the 2009 championship and perhaps Formula One itself would look very different.